The Ideas of Nietzsche, Nietzsche and Metaphysics. In this lecture we will introduce metaphysics and learn about the first metaphysical systems proposed by the ancient Greeks. We will then proceed to understand Nietzsche's critique of traditional metaphysics, and finally introduce his own interpretation of the universe. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. The word metaphysics literally means beyond physics. Its subject matter transcends the physical sciences. The goal of metaphysical thought is an understanding of the essence of the universe, or in other words, the ultimate constitution of nature. For such an understanding, metaphysics must go behind or beyond the physical stuff which the sciences are concerned with. For this reason, metaphysics has often been described as abstract theory with no basis in reality. The ancient Greeks were the first metaphysicians. Cultures prior to the Greeks provided explanations for the nature and origin of the universe. However, these were myths which involved angry gods and animal deities. The Greeks were the first culture we know of to progress from the confines of mythological thinking and search for naturalistic explanations of the universe. Early Greek metaphysicians asked fundamental questions which still plague the minds of philosophers today. What is the foundation of reality? What is the cause of its motion and evolution? What is its true nature? In contemplating these questions, some Greeks concluded that the visible world they perceived did not provide the answers they were looking for. There had to be a foundation which all of this rested upon, and a source or origin which the visible world was born from. They proceeded to assume that behind or above the visible world was a metaphysical world. They claimed this reality could not be perceived, but thought that its existence could be inferred. Everything must have an origin, even the visible world, and the origin of the visible world must be a metaphysical world, or so they thought. This reasoning led to the formulation of the two-world theory. The two-world theory claims the universe to be composed of two different realities. There is the visible world and the metaphysical world. Nietzsche singled out two philosophers in particular he held responsible for the popularity of the two-world theory, a popularity that has continued to this day. Anaximander was a pre-Socratic philosopher born in Ionia. He proposed the visible world to have its source in a metaphysical world he called infinite, indefinite, and boundless. All things emanated from this metaphysical world, and upon perishing all things returned to this infinite source. Plato lived approximately 150 years after Anaximander. His influence on Western thought is undeniable. The 20th century renowned philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once said that all Western philosophy was a series of footnotes to Plato. Plato adhered to the two-world theory and claimed the universe to be composed of two different realities. Along with the visible world we experience, he believed there to be a metaphysical reality of forms which existed beyond the heavens, a reality which he called the true reality. Nietzsche, for reasons we will explore, did not adhere to the two-world theory. As he wrote in Human, All Too Human, "For there is nothing at all we could state about the metaphysical world except its differentness, a differentness inaccessible and incomprehensible to us. It would be a thing with negative qualities." Even if a metaphysical world were to exist, which, especially in his later works, Nietzsche denies as an absurd thought, there is no way human beings could have any knowledge of it whatsoever. Our minds have evolved to deal with the things which actually exist in this world, and we could never gain knowledge of a metaphysical world which exists, in Plato's words, beyond the heavens. Nietzsche thought that the belief in a metaphysical world existing beyond the heavens was absurd. Yet it was and still is a belief that is widespread. How could so many people, even academics and intellectuals, believe in such a ridiculous idea? In contemplating this question, Nietzsche entered the realm of psychology, He began to realize that belief in a metaphysical world is not arrived at through rational arguments or careful observation, but instead is an irrational belief motivated primarily by fear. Nietzsche pleaded with his readers not to succumb to such irrationality, and to realize that the visible world, a reality which can actually be experienced, is the only reality. Remain faithful to the earth, he advises us, and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. In order to understand Nietzsche's psychological insights, we must understand his analysis of the two-world theory. In postulating the existence of a metaphysical world, metaphysicians were degrading the visible world, either knowingly or unknowingly. The metaphysical world was held to be the source of the visible world. Through some process, the metaphysical world was thought to create or give birth to the visible world. Therefore, the metaphysical world theoretically could exist even if the visible world did not exist. This implies that the metaphysical world is somehow higher or more valuable than the visible world, an implication which led early metaphysicians to morally judge the two different realities. A moral judgment being simply a judgment about whether something is good or evil, right or wrong. The metaphysical world they claimed is good. It was called divine, immortal, and indestructible by Anaximander, and proposed to be the home of goodness, truth, beauty, and perfection by Plato. The visible world, on the other hand, was thought to be a defective and evil world, nothing but a shadow of the divine metaphysical world. Nietzsche asked himself why a non-perceptible metaphysical world would be called divine and beautiful, while the reality we actually experience, the visible world, would be degraded as defective and evil. Nietzsche began to understand that all metaphysical worlds were thought to be permanent and stable realities. It was an eternal reality, one devoid of flux, a world of being, to use the terminology of metaphysics. The visible world, as we all know, is a world characterized by change. Things grow, transform, and die. It is a world of flux, or a world of becoming. Nietzsche concluded that it was because the metaphysical world was posited to be a stable and permanent reality that it was deemed good, and it was because the visible world is a world of flux that it was called evil and defective. Why would a permanent and stable reality be called good, and a reality of change be called evil? Because change entails suffering, the pains of growth, fear, loss, anxiety, and death. Anaximander expresses the idea that the visible world, the world of change, is the home of all the things humans spend their lives trying to avoid or deny. Who is there that could redeem you from the curse of coming to be, he asks. Nietzsche explained that the search for a metaphysical world or a true world is really a secret desire to escape suffering. Man seeks the truth, a world that is not self-contradictory, not deceptive, does not change, a true world, a world in which one does not suffer. Other philosophers have claimed that the search for something permanent and stable in the universe has been ubiquitous throughout human history. As the philosopher L.S. Stebbing wrote, "There seems to be a deep-rooted tendency in the human mind to seek something that persists through change. Consequently, the desire for explanation seems to be satisfied only by the discovery that what appears to be new and different was there all the time." However, Nietzsche was unique in pinpointing the psychological motives which directed this search for permanence. He called this search the metaphysical need, and concluded that metaphysics has traditionally served the purpose of allowing individuals to delude themselves into thinking that beyond this world exists a more perfect and divine realm, a realm where suffering, fear, and death are absent. Philosophers degrade this reality of change on the basis that it causes so much pain, and elevate a fictional reality to the position of divinity. As Nietzsche wrote, "To invent fables about a world other than this one has no meaning at all. unless an instinct of slander, detraction, and suspicion against life has gained the upper hand in us. In that case, we avenge ourselves against life with a phantasmagoria of another, a better life. A phantasmagoria, for those unfamiliar with the word, is a series of imaginary images. Throughout his life, Nietzsche expressed this idea over and over again. To imagine another more valuable world, he said, is an expression of hatred for the world that makes one suffer. Metaphysicians did not assert the existence of a metaphysical world because they spent years in disinterested contemplation, nor did they have some divine inspiration which allowed them to glimpse such a world. Instead, the metaphysical world is a world fabricated solely from psychological needs. Nietzsche thought that individuals who needed to believe in a metaphysical world were weak and cowardly. No matter how terrifying and tragic life may be, he thought that one must face it directly and muster the strength to endure and even affirm it. Contrary to this ideal of Nietzsche's, the vast majority of individuals have deluded themselves with stories of the existence of another world, a world where they believe their highest hopes will be realized, and their failures on this earth will be redeemed. In a shocking passage, Nietzsche identifies Plato as a weak individual who was unable to endure life as it is, and thus an individual who deluded himself with stories of another world. As he wrote, Plato is a coward before reality. Consequently, he flees into the ideal. Nietzsche understood that most human beings were weak and cowardly, and so realized that most would require the solaces of metaphysical worlds and realities. Only the strong few would be able to remain faithful to the earth. He therefore understood the necessity of the faith in a metaphysical world. The decadents need the lie, he said. It is one of the conditions of their preservation. Without the comforts which accompany the illusions of metaphysical worlds, the decadent would collapse in utter anguish over life. Only the rare individual who was strong and courageous enough could live without the belief in a metaphysical world. Heraclitus was one such individual. He was an ancient Greek philosopher who did not assert the existence of a metaphysical world. I see nothing other than becoming, he said, or in other words, the visible world is all that exists. Nietzsche echoes this notion, giving credit to Heraclitus. Heraclitus will remain eternally right with his assertion that being is an empty fiction. The apparent world is the only one. The true world is merely added by a lie. Or to use the terminology we have been throughout this lecture, the visible world is the only one. The metaphysical world is merely added by a lie. So how did Nietzsche view the universe? What was the nature of his metaphysical interpretation? It was certainly an interpretation devoid of any sort of alternate reality. Nietzsche thought there was only one reality, and it was the visible world we could experience. Furthermore, he did not think it made any sense to morally judge this universe. In one of his earlier works, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche likened the universe to a child who builds castles in the sand only to destroy them. Creation and destruction in the universe are done so with the same innocence and indifference as a child building castles in the sand. There is no point in ascribing moral judgments to this reality, for it is literally a reality which is beyond good and evil. The universe to Nietzsche was the will to power. And do you know what the world is to me? Shall I show it to you in my mirror? This world, a monster of energy, without beginning, without end, a firm iron magnitude of force that does not grow bigger or smaller, that does not expend itself but only transforms itself, a sea of forces flowing and rushing together, eternally changing, eternally flooding back, as a becoming that knows no satiety, no disgust, no weariness. This world is the will to power, and nothing besides, and you yourselves are also this will to power, and nothing besides.